Arnie, he, him in Washington. What's going on?
Oh, I'm a little pissed at myself because if Shannon, if I'd known that you were going to be on today, I've been saving a brain question, but I know you guys don't like to switch subjects, so I can stick to my original call. If
I'll be back. I promise. I'll be back.
Okay. So this is regarding Mormonism and sort of how it's referred to on the show typically. I know every host is a little different, but I'm in kind of a weird place. I'm an ex-Mormon, and yet when Mormonism is sort of used as the go-to ridiculous example of a religion, it still kind of like gets under my skin, and I don't know why. I mean, I don't have a vested interest in it anymore. I mean, I still have family that are members, but I'm more curious, why is it that sort of, like, what is it about Mormonism that makes it stand out as that kind of an example?
I could give you a reason why I would utilize it, and in the context I would, that might help kind of elucidate it. So when I am, or other hosts are, I suppose I should only speak for myself, but when I utilize it, it's usually in the context of having a conversation with a Christian. And in that conversation with a Christian, they would absolutely reject a lot of the claims of the Mormon faith and see them as outright ridiculous, even though it's analogous to and is kind of like an addendum to their faith. So utilizing the outsider test of faith and then using Mormonism as the example allows somebody who has a similar or almost parallel belief set to recognize that even though those belief sets are parallel and have some overlap, there are claims within that belief set that they would have to, like, sort of on their face admit are ridiculous, in the hopes that that will kind of bring them to the point that they think to themselves, oh, okay, well, I'm just outright dismissing this as ridiculous. However, there are similar things within my faith, which is the point of utilizing the example to say, hey, there's ridiculous stuff here too. But it brings it into stark contrast that because it's so close and parallel. And also there's a lot more contemporary history supporting the Mormon faith that you can, because it was so recently created, that you can say, okay, well, if you're saying there's historical documentation that backs up your faith, Mormons can say that as well. And in fact, have archives and archives and archives full of historical documentation that far surpasses potentially what you would be referencing. So why wouldn't you believe that instead? So it's got a lot of interesting sort of allegories and parallels that allow that to come to stark contrast in these types of conversations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's more like an issue with me. I'm sure, like, in a few years, it probably won't even bother me. But since I'm kind of a recent ex-Mormon,
you're deconstructing, so you have lots of latent faith-related, probably like cognitive infrastructure that's related to that previous faith that you maybe don't even realize yet. I still have like latent Christianity all over me, and it pops its ugly head up in the strangest situations, and I have to kind of deconstruct in those moments and think, okay, is this something that's a vestige that I just didn't even realize was the case?
So how long did it take for you to not be defensive?
I don't know if I know the answer to that question. To not be defensive. I don't know if I know the answer, because I think that in certain instances I could still be defensive, and that may have a root in the fact that I did wholeheartedly believe it, and I don't like to think that I'm silly. So there must have been a good reason in my mind for me to believe it, and saying it's ridiculous is kind of akin to saying I'm ridiculous and am capable of believing foolish things. And that's an emotional tie. I don't know. What do you think, Arden? You defensive?
I mean, I think I don't know if I've ever used it in myself, but I think most of I can see its utility as like an allegory, especially because, like, you know, when you're dealing with Christians, for example, maybe it's not as easy to directly like disprove Jesus or something, right? The existence of Jesus, like there's like an argument that can be had there, but with some of the claims of like the Mormon faith, I think it's a little bit more easy to like directly disprove claims that they make oftentimes. So it's a little bit easier to show how ridiculous it is, or certain things of it are, or certain aspects of it are, and that people still believe it. So yeah, I think it can be used as a really powerful allegory, because it's like the same phenomenon going on, right? But just kind of blown up to like a larger proportion of like the suspension of disbelief that you have to engage in to like actually think that those things are true. But yeah, I mean, I can understand how that would be frustrating, and it's maybe not always helpful in getting Mormons to think that atheism is like a warm, friendly place to go. But it's kind of hard when you're working with this like sort of activist stuff, and you have to take sort of a utilitarian calculus. Like, is this example going to be useful in communicating my point in this conversation, or is it going to like off-put certain groups of people to a certain degree? And I think everyone comes to like a different conclusion on those sort of calculus. So I don't know if there was like a
Can I
good
point out a
answer.
downside? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I'd like to point out a downside. So one thing about Mormonism is to understand it, it does take a huge investment of like time and effort. And so most people aren't going to make that time and effort investment. The only way typically people who really know Mormonism deeply are people that used to be Mormon. And so when someone refers to Mormonism as being ridiculous and then points out maybe some thing that appears on the surface to be ridiculous, Mormons hearing that say, well, obviously that person doesn't know my religion, and it sort of galvanizes them and reaffirms them. And I know it's not your mission to like, deconvert Mormons in general, but that's just one downside is that it referring to it as ridiculous makes Mormons like, double down, like, oh yeah, now I know it's true because we're being persecuted.
Yeah, I totally hear that. And I mean, this is something I deal with all the time. Like for me, I love empiricism, right? I have a show on trans rights and I like to argue trans rights from empiricism. But there are some people who feel like that ostracizes certain people and will never move certain people over to caring about the rights of like a marginalized class of people. And so like that's I understand why that's frustrating. I absolutely think it's possible that it could make someone like completely shut down any consideration they would have of like deconstructing their faith. But at the same time, you can't be responsible for every individual's deconstruction. And like I said, for me, there's a utilitarian calculus that takes place. I said, like, I would think in this moment, I don't think I'm going to put off as many people as I may be convincing. And so I think it's acceptable to use this example here. But yeah, like certainly if you're at like
the pros outweigh the cons. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, and it that sucks because right, some people are going to be left out by that. Some people are going to be kind of burned by that, and that sucks. And it's an unfortunate like consequence of communicating ideas to broad groups in that way. But I don't really know how it's possible to even avoid that. So
Yeah, I don't think there's really a one way either. I mean, I understand that you have a visceral reaction to it, but other people like that isn't necessarily the case when it comes to everybody who is a Mormon either. Like some people may hear this sort of argument being made and think to themselves, well, now I need to go investigate it and prove that it's true. And then come like, and I've heard this story time and time again, so I know it does happen. And through that investigation to prove that it isn't ridiculous, they come to the realization that, oh shoot, maybe it is. So I think it takes all different manner of communication strategy in order to be able to effectively do like any form of activism. And I hear and understand that this one isn't effective or wouldn't have been effective for you and some other people that you may know, but that doesn't mean that it's unilaterally not the case that it may be an effective strategy. There would have been a better one for you and the other people that you're speaking about, and I'm sure that it is out there. But that strategy that is effective would have been effective for you may not be effective for somebody else. So I love Arden's phrase of the sort of internal calculus of trying to figure out the best strategy. And the problem is that there is no such thing as one best strategy, because no matter what strategy you land on after you've done those internal deliberations, there's going to be somebody who isn't going to be able to be affected by it. Otherwise, we'd all, whoever found it would just be able to get us all to believe the right things, right? Because they'd be able to effectively communicate to all of us and all of us would be compelled. But there's just so many different ways that people come to this determinations that it just couldn't be the case, I don't think.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys. And how do I find out who's on next? Like, is there something online? I'm not very tech savvy, but is there a simple website or something I can go to find out what the host scheduled is?
I will see if we can take that away because I am not sure of the answer to that, to be perfectly honest with you. I know that there is a website. The Atheist Experience website is a place that you can go, but I'm not sure if they load the host schedules, but that's a good suggestion. I'll take that away. So thank you for that.
Okay.
Arnie. And
Right.
call back and talk to me about brains.
Thanks, Arnie.
I will. Thank you.
See you later. Perfect. Thank you, Arnie.